Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So we're gathered today in Greenway Cemetery on this Veterans Day 2025, when all the rest of America is supposed to take time out to thank our veterans, to remember our veterans, to visit with and hear stories from those who care to share, and remember those that have gone before and are buried in cemeteries all over the country like this one in Berkeley Springs. So it's good. And any time that we can do something to make that day a little more special, I think that's good too. So that's what we're about today. We're here for a ceremony and a recognition of someone who's buried in this cemetery that has some really unique history and makes it a little bit more special. I'm Dan Murphy. Among other things, I am the president of the Hancock Historical Society. If you don't know, that's across the river about 8 miles in Maryland on the other side. And I'm also a very avid Civil War history buff. Not a historian, but an enthusiast about the history. And I love the stories that go along with the Civil War. The history of Hancock's Civil War history is tied very closely to that of Berkeley Springs, or as you all know, the town of Bath, as it was known during the Civil War. And our history together goes back to 1862. The first battle of 1862 probably happened in our neck of the woods, when Stonewall Jackson brought his army up from Winchester on what was not a bad day. It was kind of unseasonably warm when they started out, on his way to Romney, then Virginia, to go into winter quarters. Romney changed hands several times through the Civil War, and he was going to stabilize that and winter over there as he was about to do his business of disrupting the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Well, he starts up this way and he decides that he hears there's some Union activity in the town of Bath, and so he moves on into Berkeley Springs, and without much effort at all, he dissuades the Union forces and runs them back to the banks of the Potomac River. And in so doing that, he deviates from his plan again, and he thinks, you know what? Before I go on to Romney, why don't I just capture a Union town? The town of Hancock. And so he sends Turner Ashby across the river. He's blindfolded, taken into the telegraph office, and he meets a young General Frederick Lander, who you're going to hear more about today, and how he connects to the person we're honoring here today. He's in charge of the troops in Hancock. They don't even have equipment. Some of them don't have their weapons yet. He wasn't much of a threat, but when he was told that if he didn't surrender, he'd be bombarded, he responded to Turner Ashby to tell Stonewall Jackson to bombard and be damned. And he said, if you were to fire on this town, you would probably hurt more of your friends than your enemies, because Hancock is such a seckish town. So we had, mostly our affluent people in Hancock, Southern sympathizers. But we also had strict abolitionists, and we had those who supported the Union cause. We were a true border town in a border state. But then the other thing that happened that made it unique was that not so bad weather that he left Winchester in turned into be what I've read, the historians will correct me, the worst winter snowstorm in the history to date. Now, they didn't have great records of snowstorms, but it was the worst snowstorm, and Stonewall decided it would be better to turn around, not try to cross the Potomac River and invade the North. And he made his way back to Romney after much duress through the mountains in the snow, and wintered over there and waited until spring to come out and fight. And as they say, the rest is history. But that's the story of the Battle of Hancock that had pretty much zero casualties on both sides. But it's an interesting part that goes with it. So we're here today because of a lot of people who did a lot of interesting work. It was actually back before COVID when I got a call from Councilwoman Schene, and she told me about this plan of restoring a stone and maybe having a little event and this signage and so forth and so on, and make something special out of this guy that I'd never heard of, who was buried in the cemetery in Berkeley Springs. And so after much work by a lot of people that you're going to hear from later on today, brings us to where we are now, which is to appreciate this beautifully restored headstone for General Simon Forrester Barstow, to learn more about his life and his career and so forth. There are Union veterans buried here. There are also Confederate soldiers in this cemetery. There are probably veterans from every war since the Civil War buried in this cemetery. So that's the right thing to be doing on Veterans Day. So thanks for coming out. Thanks for being here. There's some dignitaries that I want to introduce to you all that are part of making this happen. And the first person I'd like to call forward, and I hope you'll welcome, is Mayor Schene. Down on the back.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to come here on a cold, brisk November afternoon. Many great things in our history have occurred during the worst of weather, and we gather here to celebrate Brevet General Barstow. To all the veterans of the town of Bath, Morgan County, to all those gathered here today, we thank you for your service. This moment belongs to the great volunteers that put this event together. On behalf of the town of Bath, our recorder, Susan Webster, Councilwoman Skinner, Councilwoman Dawson, Councilman Rick Weber, we thank you for that hard work. A town of Bath or any small municipality thrives on its level of volunteerism, and we have great volunteers here. So thank you to this group. You know, I could stand here for 10 minutes and read off the names, and you know who you are, and thank you for doing this great work where no one sees you doing it, but the job gets done. Again, thank you for that, and let's proceed. I'm here to hear more about the Barstow story.
Okay, we are representing the Morgan County Commission, Commissioner Joel Tuttle. Please welcome him.
You can go see if you get that to work. Welcome everybody. Did not know what kind of a crowd we might have today. A little chilly for a November day, but I told them it beats the snow that the rest of the state had yesterday. So welcome here, and we're just glad that we could all come and to celebrate Veterans Day. The county commission played but a small part in the creation of the memorial for General Barstow. We simply granted some funding from our hotel motel tax, and we truly believe that that's one of the great uses of those funds. We love to promote history and art and recreation and beautification whenever we can. So on behalf of myself and Commissioners Clark and Forney, just welcome everyone. And I too will leave the history to the historians, but I'm interested in hearing some more about General Barstow. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we're going to move in a little bit more about the story of the man that we're here to recognize and honor today. And the next four gentlemen that you hear from are a unique gathering of historical authors. No, I should say they're authors who write about history. Whether they are historical yet will remain to be seen. But we have several of them here with us, and we're going to enjoy, I think, and learn a little bit more about Barstow and people that were important in his life that factored into this whole complicated little scenario of Hancock and so forth with the battle in Berkeley Springs. First person I want to introduce to you, and I'm going to read a bio here, please, if I could, is Terry Heder. Terry, can you hear me okay? I'm yelling as loud as I can, but I'll keep going. Terry Heder is a historian and editor for the Civil War Trails, helping to connect visitors with historic stories at over 1,500 historic sites across 6 states. He was previously the Director of Interpretation, Education, and History for the Shenandoah Valley Battlefield National Historic District, and he served as a regional coordinator for the Civil War Sesquicentennial in the Shenandoah Valley. So you know that was a busy time. He has written hundreds of interpretive signs along with waysides, exhibit panels, museum exhibits, traveling exhibits, digital and interactive content, film scripts, audio tours, magazine articles, brochures, and driving and walking tours. Terry formerly worked as the executive director for the Meridian Museum of Arts in Meridian, Mississippi, and as a media specialist for the Navy Family Service Center at the U.S. Naval Station in Rota, Spain. He resides in Broadway, Virginia, with his beloved wife, Kirsten. So I would like you to welcome Terry Heder, and as he comes forward, I'd also like to invite the mayor, the commissioner, and Councilwoman Skinner, if she's here, as well as Steve French, our speaker, who's going to help in the unveiling of the signing. So please welcome Terry Heder.
So of all the people who are speaking here today, I'm the one who needed the microphone the most. So for those who might not be able to hear me in the back, I apologize in advance. Thanks for having me here today. It's an honor to be part of this event, this unveiling, this commemoration, especially on Veterans Day. Veterans Day is deep meaning to me, both as a historian and as on a personal level. Growing up in a military family, working on military posts, and I want to take a moment as for to thank all the veterans who are here today for their service and for their support of this country. For those who are not familiar with Civil War Trails, the Trails program, as mentioned, is a network that goes across 6 states with over 1,500 signs. This new sign, this site, the story of Forrester Barstow, joins that network. And within that network, though, every site is special, every site is local. The Trails program is a grassroots, community-based affair. You can hear about all the people who contributed to bringing this sign into existence. We work with local partners to tell Civil War stories at local sites where they happen, to tell stories that are important to you. Once our signs are in the ground, we work to connect visitors to those sites through our marketing, through printed map guides, our website, our interactive maps, social media, upcoming e-newsletter, and the signs themselves, the branding. When you're traveling around those 6 states, when you see that logo, you see the bugle sign, you know that you've got a great content at the end of that. It attracts people to stop the car, hit the brakes, get out of their car, and go visit that site. But they represent very well the work that we do, along with historians like Steve French and local partners, that we do on a daily basis to keep history alive, to keep the memory of people like Simon Forrester Barstow alive. I've always thought it's one thing for people to go through the terrible experience that Americans endured during the Civil War era. It's another to think that they would go through all of that and that their trials and tribulations would be forgotten, gone like dust in the wind, like it never mattered. They deserve to be remembered. We owe it to them for them to be remembered. This sign and others like it are one critical way we help to keep their memories alive long after they pass from this earth. Again, I thank to everyone who helped to make that possible, this sign, and for your part in preserving the memory of Simon Forrester Barstow. And now if everyone can come up for the unveiling. Again, I cannot thank enough the people in this community who came together to work over a number of years to bring this into existence.
And Terry, if I could, please, just want to let the people know that our musician today is Josh Hetrick. He's currently the pastor of the Church of Christ, playing bluegrass professionally since he was 8 years old. Josh has played with some of the best bluegrass bands to come out of Eastern Ohio. And he's going to play for you Blue-Eyed Boston Boy while they unveil the sign from the Forrester.
Down.
He was just a blue-eyed Boston boy. His voice was low with pain. I'll do
if you should ride and I should fall, you'll do as much for me, while mother's at home awaiting the news. To her in the room, she's waiting at home like a patient slave. Her pale face is pale and closed. Her heart will be broken when I die. Her face I'll see no more. Just then the order came and God's hand. They answered I and on that brave devoted band. But among the dead at the top of the hill, the boy with the golden hair, and the tall dark man that rode by his side, he stood by him there. There was none to write that blue-eyed girl the words her lover had said, while mother's at home awaiting the boy, she'll only find he's dead. While mother's at home awaiting her boy, she'll only find that he's dead.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much. Okay, so moving on through now, we've got I've got to introduce somebody that's going to do an introduction. That sounds crazy, but when you get these historians together, you got to take advantage of whatever you can. The next guy that I'm going to talk about is Ed Steers, and he comes to us with a background that, you wouldn't think historical writer, but let me tell you about what Ed did before he started writing books about the Civil War. His professional career was as a molecular biologist. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and was recruited by the National Institutes of Health during his 32 years of tenure at NIH. He served as the Deputy Science Director of the National Institution of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Disease. He also served as Adjunct Professor of Biochemistry at the George Washington University School of Medicine. But on his retirement, Ed began his second career writing about American history, publishing over 25 books. 25 books, people. His award-winning book, Blood on the Moon, The Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, was recognized as the golden standard on this subject. Ed and his wife, Pat, retired to West Virginia where they have lived for 31 years. Please welcome Ed Steers. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. I'm not going to talk today, as the program indicates, on the General Lander funeral, but I'll just introduce Ward Hill Lamon. Ward Hill Lamon surely is going to follow through the cracks of history and become unknown to any of us here today if it wasn't for his good friendship with Abraham Lincoln. The two men met in early 1850s while they both were practicing law along Illinois' 8th Judicial District. Lamon was a rather large, imposing man, 19 years Lincoln's junior, and well known among his fellow lawyers as quite a wrestler, something that appealed greatly to Lincoln. And I presume none of you here are aware of the fact that Abraham Lincoln is the only president that's actually been elected to the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. Well, when Lincoln was elected president in November of 1860, Lamon appointed himself Lincoln's personal bodyguard, and he accompanied Lincoln on his 1,700-mile inaugural journey from Springfield, Illinois to Washington, D.C. He had sought a diplomatic appointment, probably along with 1,000 other people, particularly wanting to be the ambassador to Russia, but Lincoln had other plans for Lemon. He appointed him the United States Marshal for the District of Columbia. And on the night of the assassination, Lemon was in Richmond, Virginia on a special assignment for Lincoln. And I think for the rest of his life, he carried that burden that had he been in Washington that evening and accompanied Lincoln to the theater, he would have prevented Booth from assassinating Lincoln. Maybe so. Well, Bob O'Connor, in his alternate life, is married, has 2 children, and lives in Charlestown, West Virginia, not far from where Lamon is buried in Gerardstown. Bob is a prolific writer, having written over 36 books. His most famous, I think, is titled The Virginian Who Might Have Saved Lincoln. Bob has a penchant for researching and writing about lesser-known characters in history that surely would fade away if it wasn't for Bob's work, for which we are grateful. And so, I give you Ward Hill Lamon, close personal friend of Abraham Lincoln, and Bob O'Connor, my longtime friend along the Lincoln Trail. Mr. Lamon, you are on.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. It's my great honor to be here with you today. It was certainly a nice long ride from Martinsburg with the changing of the leaves, as this is one of my favorite times of the year. But today's cold reminds me more of my times in Danville, Illinois. I was asked to attend to represent our beloved President, Abraham Lincoln, who unfortunately was taken from us back in 1865. I was great friends with the President and served officially as the United States Marshal of the District of Columbia under his watch and unofficially as his personal bodyguard. He called me his particular friend. Many say I didn't do a very good job at that bodyguard position. But I'm here to tell you that if I'd have been at Ford's Theater, there would have been a much more favorable outcome. I've always regretted that I was in Richmond that evening. The President and I first met in Simon, Barstow, at Brigadier General Frederick Lander's funeral in 1862 in Washington. General Lander, with the aid of Barstow, were successful in nearby Hancock in defending that town from the Confederate attack in 1862 in January, on a day much colder than this. My first wife, Angeline, who is from the Whiting's Neck area of Shepherdstown, Virginia, and her mother knew General Barstow's mother-in-law, Mrs. Peters, as she lived close by in Beddington. My wife, Sally, who is with me today, and I also had a chance encounter with Simon Barstow at White Sulphur Springs Resort several years ago. The three of us had been seeking temporary relief at the hot springs in our later years as our ailments had gotten the best of us. As I recall, at that time I was having serious issues with gout. I found it interesting that at White Sulphur Springs I would often also be conversing with former Confederate veterans. Seems like ailments of old age did not discriminate between the blue and the gray. My recollection of Simon Barstow were that he was always a subordinate officer, never assuming command, but serving as someone's aide-de-camp or adjutant general. He was always energetic in his duties and quite accommodating. It should be no surprise to you that often generals get the credit when their faithful underlings like General Barstow are doing the yeoman's work behind the scenes in full support of the armies. They often don't get the credit they deserve. That certainly has been the case with the soldier we honor here today. I can relate to that myself, as much of my work was behind the scenes and known to just a few others. Simon Barstow's record of service to the Union, which I have recently read, was exemplary. His career is particularly highlighted by his actions at Gettysburg and Petersburg. The people of Berkeley Springs should be very proud of the service of Simon Barstow to the Grand Army of the Republic. He was a fine officer, as the record shows, and also a good and faithful servant. Thank you.
So as the story is unfolding here, our next speaker will bring you the final part of the General Barstow story. I don't know if you've thought about how fortunate we are for these last three speakers from the Eastern Panhandle that know so much of the history of the greatest war, in our country's history. From Bob, Ed, and now our primary speaker for today, a Hedgesville, West Virginia native, Steve French, is nationally recognized as the authority on Confederate guerrilla warfare in the Eastern Theater. He is the author of the multiple award-winning Imboden's Brigade in the Gettysburg Campaign. Also, Rebel Chronicles, Raiders, Scouts, and Train Robbers of the Upper Potomac, and the critically acclaimed Phantoms of the South Fork, Captain McNeil and his Rangers. See the theme? Guerrilla warfare running around this country over and over and over. This guy knows it. He's also the editor of 4 Years Along the Tillings, the Diary of Elisha Manor, the author of more than 100 historical articles. His stories have appeared in numerous publications, including the Washington Times, Gettysburg Magazine, and Crossfire, magazine of the American Civil War Roundtable, UK. Steve French's writing awards include the 2008 Bachelder Coddington Award, the 2009 Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable Book Award, the Jefferson Davis Historical Gold Medal, and the Hagerstown Civil War Roundtable's 2016 Henry Kidd Douglas Award. He is the current president of the Harpers Ferry Civil War Roundtable. People, please welcome Steve French to tell you the rest of the story.
Okay, I'll try to carry the whole crowd here. I think I can. A long time ago, the National Geographic used to have specials on every month or two when I was a child a long time ago. And one of my favorites was Egypt, the Gift of the Nile. And in that, at the end of that film, they were at the Temple of Abu Simbel in Upper Egypt, at the Temple of Ramses II, the great Ramses you've all heard about. And the narrator, Richard Basehart, said, "There's an old Egyptian saying,
To speak of the dead is to bring them back to life. And that's what I'm going to try to do here a little bit today with Simon Forrester Barstow, a person that didn't get a lot of recognition in the Civil War. He got some, but if you'd asked anyone in Berkeley Springs, except a few people years ago, about this general, they would have no idea. When Susan Webster said to me, we have a general up in the graveyard, up in Greenway, I said, and told me who it was, I said, who is that? And so I started looking in, especially to his military career. October 16, 1817, Gabriel and Nancy Barstow, Nancy Forrester Barstow, welcomed their new son, Simon Forrester. Her father, a famous sea captain, Simon Forrester, one of the famed sea captains of New England. And they're the old blue bloods from Salem, Massachusetts, a town known for its witchcraft and being rock-ribbed Union supporters during the war, during the Civil War. Now, as he grew up, he had a good education, just like all of his siblings. He had 5 or maybe 7 brothers and sisters, and they were all successful in life, in different occupations. He would graduate from Harvard in 1841. He went into the practice of law, and he practiced in Boston and near Boston for many years. Now, when the war came along in 1861, he didn't join. The man's 42 years old. He's 42 when the war starts, but he was a strong Union supporter. In October 1861, his friend, a very famous American of the time, Frederick West Lander, asked him to come to Maryland and give him some help. Well, who was Lander? He was, as I say, a very famous American before the Civil War even began. He was a road builder in the far west, Rocky Mountain region. He was a famous poet and a Renaissance man, well known. Even at the beginning of the war, or right before the war started, Abraham Lincoln would send Lander on a secret mission to contact Governor Sam Houston of Texas. And Sam Houston was determined to keep Texas in the Union. He didn't succeed, but he was a Unionist, and Lander went on this mission. Well, to go on, Lander joined George B. McClellan as a private citizen, a private aide. And in some of the battles in what's going to be West Virginia today, called Northwestern Virginia then, Lander is famous. At the Battle of Philippi, some call it the first battle of the war, he makes a famous ride, a great, almost neck-breaking ride down a mountain and into the town so he can be the first there. He was that kind of a man. And when General Kelly is shot in the chest and soldiers grab the Confederate who shot him and are going to kill him, Lander comes over and he said, "That man is my prisoner." And he takes him away. He saves that man's life. Later on, at the Battle of Rich Mountain in July 1861, the story goes that a Confederate artillery unit is shooting at Lander and some of the men. Remember, he's a private citizen. And he jumps up on a rock, and the soldiers hand muskets to him, and he shoots down 7 Confederates in that. But he was a very brave man. Finally, he's talked to going into the Army, and they make him a brigadier general. He goes from private citizen to brigadier general. And in a skirmish at a place called Edwards Ferry along the Potomac the day after the Battle of Ball's Bluff, a Mississippi rifleman will shoot him in the instep, and the bullet will range up through the calf. Now, he has the best doctors. He has a great nurse, his wife, the English actress Jean Davenport, and they look at him and they say this is not going to be too bad. But what happens is he develops an infection in his blood, and he will, over the remaining months of his life, he's going to self-medicate with alcohol, and it doesn't work. But it's about this time he calls on Barstow, who is his friend. Lander was also from Salem, Massachusetts. And he says, I need your help. I want you to be liaison for me and Governor Andrew. If I need money for the troops from Massachusetts, I want you to work that out with Governor John Andrew. So, how does Lander get to Hancock? Finally, he gets better, a little bit better. And the Secretary of War, Chase, will order him to Romney. He is to go to Romney and take command of General Kelly's division, about 11,000 men who are occupying Romney. So he's going to leave Washington, D.C., where he resides, and head up this way. And we heard just a while ago about the bombardment of Hancock. He gets to Hancock the night before Jackson attempts to take the town, and he takes charge, and he helps prevent that. Where's Barstow now? Well, Barstow is back in D.C. with Lander's wife, and they're trying to raise money. Lander will need money for his command. Finally, she comes up with $800. Now that doesn't sound like a lot today, you go down to the hotel downtown, Country Inn, that might be a weekend. Spend $800 staying there and having a good time. But in our money today, that $800 amounts to about $29,000. She was able to raise in purchasing power, and she sent Forrester off with her. They're out by that time, Patterson Creek, a camp that's muddy, cold, snowing. This is a bad winter. And it's terrible. You take a 42-year-old man that's probably leads a rather sedentary life and put him in that position. But he loves it. So finally, they are going to start moving this way from Cumberland, headed this way, building the railroad back up, which the Confederates have destroyed. And they're going to make camp in Paw Paw in early February. And Barstow is going to set up headquarters in a schoolhouse and the telegraph office for Lander. Lander's at this time is going downhill gradually. He's got lots of fever. Sometimes he'll pass out for a day or two. But then Barstow comes down with a severe case of measles. Now, measles killed thousands of men in the early days of the war, because most of them had no immunity to measles, especially in the Confederate Army and that was in West Virginia. They lived on farms. They had very little immunity. Barstow, though, is able to recover quickly. He gets back to Paw Paw, and by that time, Lander has won a great victory nearby in Bloomery Gap, probably, 20 miles or so from here, on the way to Romney. He's beaten some Virginia militia. In that battle, one of his captains wouldn't lead a charge through Bloomery Gap. If any of you have been there, you know it's cliffs and rocks, and the Confederates were everywhere. Lander relieved him of command and led the charge himself and was successful. But he gets back, Barstow gets back just in time for a big celebration, the biggest thing that's ever happened in Paw Paw, Lander's grand review of the troops. It is the biggest thing. I mean, the biggest spectacle. 11,000 men. George Washington's birthday. George Washington's birthday in the 1860s was just as big as the celebration as the 4th of July. He started at 12 o'clock and reviewed his troops, 11,000 troops, until dark, giving addresses to each regiment and brigade as he went by them. All that time until nightfall. And this is a man that's sick most of the time. We'll hurry up and get to March the 2nd. At headquarters, for 2 days, Lander has been in bed, sedated by morphine, but they think he'll get up. He's done this before, he's passed out before, they've had to medicate him, but finally one of the doctors comes in and says he'll be dead by nightfall. And they had decided, half the army was on the move towards Winchester at that time to fight against Stonewall Jackson, but Barstow took over in absence of Lander and called those soldiers back. Lander died that day at 5 o'clock, and in the next few days, Ward Hill mentioned it. He was taken back to Washington, D.C., where they had a state funeral for him with President Lincoln and all the dignitaries there, George McClellan, and Barstow and Lander's special group of soldiers called the Andrews Sharpshooters brought the corpse to Washington and then took it back for burial in Salem, Massachusetts. So what happens to Barstow? He's a private citizen. He's been waiting on a commission, but he is a private citizen. So Governor Andrew, and he wants to stay in the service. He could have went back home, no problem. Governor Andrew sends him a commission as a captain in the volunteer army. And he works with Irvin McDowell. Some of you might remember General McDowell from the first Battle of Bull Run. He's with him through the summer, through the fighting in the summer. Finally, in August 29th and 30th, you had the Battle of Second Bull Run or Second Manassas. The Union Army loses that battle. Scapegoats has to be found. Irvin McDowell is one of them. Fitzjohn Porter is another. Those of you that looked in the official records of the Union and Confederate armies, you can find Barstow's testimony. He spent a whole day testifying in support of Irvin McDowell, and he spent an hour or so in case of Fitzjohn Porter. Now McDowell was, his inquiry, they said he did probably right, the ones that were listening to it, and but he basically was cashiered and sent to another command. He wouldn't be back in the war. Fitzjohn Porter, of course, was court-martialed, and he would, over the next 16 or so years, try to rehabilitate his name, which he finally did. Okay, Barstow then goes to a man you've probably heard of, to staff of the commander of the Army of Potomac at that time, Fighting Joe Hooker. And very good general at times, but other times, especially at the Battle of Chancellorsville, he didn't do quite a good job. Fighting Joe Hooker had a wide open staff. After the sun went down, as they say, almost anything went on. But with, as far as Barstow concerned, he's up and up. He's keeping everything running smooth. But they lose the Battle of Chancellorsville. A month or so later, the Confederates head for Pennsylvania. On June 28, 1863, Hooker will send in his resignation pretty sure that Lincoln won't accept it, but he does. And not long afterwards, he orders George Gordon Meade to take command. As the armies are on the move, Meade doesn't have time to change the headquarters staff, so that's where Barstow will hook up with Meade, and he'll remain with Meade the rest of the war and into the rest of Meade's life and career in the Army. The Battle of Gettysburg, Edward Coddington, who wrote the famed book Gettysburg Campaign, A Study in Command, will make a one-sentence remark about Barstow, and he'll say what a good organizational man he was, how he could keep everything running, and especially he knew military protocol, making sure that the officer that was supposed to be there wasn't jumping over someone else, things like that. Now, he was never a line officer, but he was in a lot of danger. Today, staff officers might be many miles behind the front lines. At Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, he was 200 yards behind the front line. In the widowed Leicester's house on the Tawnytown Road, and while he was in that house with the rest of the staff, some of them were wounded. 17 horses were killed outside. So he was in a lot of danger. But once again, I want to emphasize he wasn't a commander of men that would have combat troops and giving the orders to them. He's going to be with me, like I said, the rest of the war in the Overland Campaign, Petersburg. That's 10 months. And at the end of the war, he will receive brevets. Now, a brevet was an increase in rank for something important you had done. So he receives a brevet for major, for exemplary work at Gettysburg. He'll receive another one for colonel later on, and the one he receives here, he's breveted general for meritorious service during the Petersburg campaign. A brevet is an honorary rank. It's not an official rank. It's like getting a medal. There is no increase in pay. But from then on, he's going to be people, his friends and colleagues will call him as general. After the war, he stays with Meade. They're mostly in Philadelphia. He's commanding forces along the Atlantic, or Meade is, and he meets his wife during this time, Louisa Peters. I believe they got married in June 1868. She's a lot younger, I think 20-some years younger. But she's connected, of course, with the Bettinger family. We'll hear about that a little bit later. And he stays with Meade until Meade dies in 1872. He will transfer and he'll become a quartermaster and do some service in St. Augustine, Florida. He'll retire about 1879 on disability. But during his vacations or furloughs from the Army, he and his wife will visit many different places. Islesbourg, Maine, an island there, a resort island. Mr. Lemon mentioned it. Bygones were bygones after the war. He was out there in 1876 in July. In June, Custer's last stand had happened, and they decided, the Confederate generals and officers and the Union officers were there. This is 10 years after the war. They decided to hold a memorial ball at the White and use that money to pay for a monument to Custer and his troops. He's the manager, one of the managers of the ball, Simon Barstow is. Who's the other one? John McCausland, the man that burned Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and he wanted to burn Hancock. He came close to burning Hancock before the Union cavalry arrived. And then later on, just a few weeks later, they had another one to build a monument for Robert E. Lee, to use funds for that. But he's going to retire from the Army in 1879 on disability. His war service had affected him. And we'll fast forward, July 1882. He's staying here in Berkeley, probably with his mother-in-law, Mrs. Peters, who lived near the town or in town. And he becomes ill. He stays here for a while, but he decides to go to Oakland, Maryland, to relax there, and thinking the cool air will help him. He stays at the Oakland Hotel. He's recovering for a while, and then he has a relapse. And he dies in Oakland on July 31st, 1882. But he's brought back to Berkeley Springs. He's first buried at the Old English Cemetery. And then years later, his brother-in-law, Samuel Peters, will bring him to Samuel's plot, having disinterred and bring him to Samuel's plot, and he'll be buried here. But he's an interesting character. He's one of these characters you might just run across a line or two in a book and quickly speed through. Well, he helped Meade or he helped Hook or something. Then you go on, you never read about him again. But all the people in the war, that was probably the most important thing that happened in their life, both sides. And here's an example of a person. How many hundred and some years later, we're honoring him today. He would have no idea you'd have a crowd out here to do this. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Josh is going to play Rally Round the Flag.
Yes, we'll rally round the flag, boys, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry, freedom. We'll rally from the hillside, we'll rally from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, our robbers rock, down with the traitors and all with the stars. We'll rally round the flag, rally round the cry of freedom. We're gonna string together the call of our brothers gone before, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We'll fill our ranks with 1,000,000 men or more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors and up with the stars. Are we rally now, boys, we rally once, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
Thank you, Josh. This event is pretty cool and couldn't have happened without the help of David O'Connell. And I want to give him up here a little time to say a few words. He spent some time on the town council, and he was put on the town cemetery committee during his short stay in 2024. He agreed to join the nonprofit organization, the Town of Bath Cemetery Management and Maintenance Incorporated. And he has two immediate objectives for this little cemetery that we're in. He wants to showcase the historic value of events like this one by honoring General Barstow and who else he may find in this cemetery that he may want to do similar things to. And his second goal is to establish a volunteer group to repair and restore many of the historic headstones. You all know these kind of things don't just happen. So let's welcome David O'Connell and let him have a few words.
Thank you. So Terry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
All right. All right. So good afternoon. Thank you for coming out on this chilly day. We've done a lot of research on the local Civil War soldiers buried here at Greenway. We've marked all of the graves, Union and Confederate markers. We've also researched each soldier's military, census, marriage, and newspaper records. I'd like to share a story about Union and Confederate soldiers who have a connection to Berkeley Springs. This is a story of dedication, political intrigue, revenge, and comebacks. This story may have started in the Civil War, but it ended here in Greenway. First, let me tell you about the Bechtel family. John and Henry Bechtel were brothers who fought on the Union Army and are buried here. John Bechtel completed his initial 2-year enlistment with the Maryland Cavalry before returning home in 1863. During this time, his brother Henry was captured and imprisoned, while their father, Aaron Bechtel, was working in the legislature as a senator for the newly formed state of West Virginia. So we can see the Bechtels were very committed to the Union cause. In 1864, John re-enlisted in the Pennsylvania Cavalry. Only 1 month later, his father and a number of other local politicians were arrested and imprisoned for running a bogus West Virginia government. Ironically, Aaron was sent to a prison just a couple of miles downriver from where his son, Henry, had been imprisoned. Aaron was arrested by a Confederate, Major Charles O'Farrell. Charles was a Berkeley Springs local boy who got his start with the support of a prominent attorney, Joseph Duckwall, who's also buried here. Duckwall enlisted as a private in the Virginia 89th, ultimately becoming the quartermaster for the Confederate Army. Joseph Duckwall would pay multiple visits to those political prisoners. Good chance they were talking about ransom or prisoner exchange. At the end of the war, retribution was sought against O'Farrell and Duckwall for their activities during the war. Their properties were confiscated and they couldn't practice law. Both of them left West Virginia. Years later, Joseph Duckwall would return to Morgan County and become a district judge. Charles O'Farrell never returned, but would eventually become the governor of Virginia. Now, this is just a small part of a larger story, and one of many that I have learned along the way in preparation for today's event. I do encourage you, inside this box, I do encourage you to pick up one of these self-guided tour books. They have detailed maps of the old cemetery. They identify all the Civil War soldiers buried here at Greenway. They have background on each of the soldiers. And of course, we've got a donation jar. So suggested covering for the printing is $10. For the non-cash people, we have a QR code there. And there is a QR code on the back here that allows you to donate for the fundraising campaign of your choice. Either for the historic events like this, hopefully on a warmer day, or the headstone repair and restoration project. You take the tour, you're going to see that the headstones are a little worn out, broken, down, and I would love to actually return this cemetery to a more beautiful presence. And with that, I'd like to take a moment to thank all the people who've been made this event possible. First off, I want to thank Mayor Greg Schene. Is he still here? Heedley. All right. And Joel Tuttle. Is Joel here? And all right. I also want to thank our historian, Terry Heder. Terry, where is Terry? There you are. Thank you, Terry. From the Civil War Trail Organization for providing his insights. Thank you. I want to thank our speakers today, Dr. Dan Murphy, Steve French, Bob O'Connor, for putting this wonderful, and Ed Steers. Thank you for putting together this wonderful memorial for General Barstow. I also want to thank our singers, Josh Hedrick, also Terry Golden from the Morgan County Historic and Genealogical Society for helping me do all the research. Thank you, Terry. And I want to thank the council members, Elizabeth Skinner, Susan Webster, and Reba Dawson for all their support. Thank you very much. And lastly, I want to thank our tour guides for today's event. After the ceremony here, you can find your tour guides at specific locations. They'll share additional stories. Terry DeSouza, she's got a wonderful story about at the Garment Monument. She'll be in Section C. Terry Golden will be found in Section C, and I'll be in the outer circle. And with that, I'll turn things over to Dr. Murphy.
Anybody lose this glove? Anybody want to buy this glove? It's a tough crowd. You're a tough crowd out here in the cold. Sitting on the concrete. I love it. You guys are true historians and true community members. So.
We're here with our friend Bryna. We're clinging to the heat. This is the day. This is our best friend, Bryna.